Welcome back, everyone, to today's Explainer. We've got a really fantastic masterclass lined up for you today, perfectly aligned with the Grade 9 English Matatag curriculum. We're going to embark on a pretty fascinating investigation together. Basically, we are going to become literary detectives. But instead of dusting for fingerprints or, tracking down alibis, we're going to use a much more powerful tool: psychological criticism. We'll be looking closely at how characters' hidden thoughts, their weird motivations, and their mental states actually build the deeper messages of Anglo-American drama. It's an absolutely incredible journey into the mind, so grab your notebooks and let's get right into it. You know that feeling when you're reading a great book or watching a movie and you find yourself literally screaming at a character, just wondering, why on earth did you just do that? We've all been there, right? Hooking into a great story usually means watching characters do inexplicable, sometimes completely irrational things. Well, the secret here is that literature, much like a dream, actually acts as a window. It reveals the deeply buried unconscious mind of a character. So what we're seeing on the surface? Yeah, that is rarely the whole story.
So here is our mapped-out journey for today. First, we'll look beneath the literary surface, then decode the unconscious mind, unpack this whole idea of the id, ego, and superego, and finally, we'll apply our new tools to a couple of famous works, Black Swan and Trifles.
Okay, let's dive right into this first part, beneath the literary surface. We're going to use psychoanalytic criticism as our magnifying glass today. This entire approach draws really heavily on the theories of Sigmund Freud. He suggested that literature, exactly like the dreams we have at night, acts as a window straight into the unconscious. Think of it kind of like a giant iceberg floating in the ocean. A character's conscious actions, what they say out loud, how they walk into a room, who they pick a fight with, that is literally just the tip of the iceberg visible above the water. But lurking way down below the surface is this massive, unseen structure of deeper desires, anxieties, and totally hidden motivations. Moving on to Part 2, Decoding the Unconscious Mind. Let's take a second to actually build out our psychological toolkit and define some vocabulary. First up is a word you've probably heard, the psyche. The psyche is, quite simply, the whole shebang, the entirety of your mind. It encompasses absolutely everything, both those everyday conscious thoughts that you're fully aware of right now and all those hidden desires that you might not even realize you have. Whenever we talk about analyzing a character's internal world today, the psyche is the overarching landscape we're exploring. Next up is the unconscious. If the psyche is the whole landscape, the unconscious is like this vast, completely dark, hidden room right in the middle of it. It's a massive reservoir of thoughts, memories, and intense emotions that exist totally outside of a character's conscious awareness. When characters act super irrational, it's almost always because they're being driven by these powerful, messy feelings that are stored away in this dark room. So, you're probably wondering, how do those feelings even get into that hidden room? Well, through repression. Repression is the act of aggressively pushing away unwanted thoughts and feelings into the deep depths of your mind. It basically operates as an involuntary defense mechanism. It's this automatic psychological process that protects characters from really uncomfortable truths or painful situations by just burying them completely out of sight from their conscious thoughts.
All right, Part 3, id, ego, and superego. Let's get to know the tripartite psyche.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Freud actually mapped this out back in 1923. He structured the mind into 3 distinct parts. You can honestly think of them as 3 totally mismatched roommates constantly battling it out inside a character's head. Look closely at this model. Notice how the perceptual conscious part up at the very top is actually quite small? But look down below that dotted line into the unconscious. You can clearly see how the structural divisions, the id, the ego, and the superego all sort of overlap between what is consciously known, what's preconscious, and that vast, deeply repressed unconscious at the very bottom. Let's actually personify these 3 roommates because it makes it so much easier to understand them. First, we have the id. Freud called this the obscure, inaccessible part of our personality. The id is pure, untamed passion and chaos. It doesn't care about good or evil. No, it only demands instant satisfaction for its instinctual needs. It is governed entirely by the pleasure principle. Then, on the total opposite end of the spectrum, we have the superego. This is the strict moral censor, your built-in repository of conscience and pride. It represents every moral restriction out there and is governed by the morality principle. It's constantly pushing the character toward absolute societal perfection and doing everything it can to repress the wild id. And then, caught squarely in the middle of this mess, is the ego. The ego is the rational governing agent standing for good reason and common sense. It's governed by the reality principle. Basically, the ego is the exhausted negotiator. It's desperately trying to release the id's intense drives in ways that won't ruin the character's life, all while trying to appease the incredibly strict, rigid rules of the superego.
Now, for a character to function somewhat normally, these psychic zones absolutely have to be harmonized. The superego and the id must find a way to coexist in some sort of balance, mostly through the ego doing its mediation thing. But if they don't, the psyche risks total destruction. If the super strict superego completely crushes the id, the character gets totally overwhelmed by unconscious guilt. This leads to a severe guilt complex, intense dissatisfaction, and just really deep unhappiness.
Part 4. Analyzing the Black Swan. Let's finally take all this abstract theory and put it into practice. Just take a really close look at this movie poster for a second. We've got our main character, Nina Sayers. She's this incredibly talented but deeply tightly wound ballerina, and she's competing for this dual role of the innocent white swan and the highly seductive black swan. Notice the stark black and white color scheme? And look right there at the cracked mirror dividing her face. Guys, these are not just cool aesthetic design choices. They are literal visual representations of a fracturing psyche under the immense, crushing pressure of artistic perfection. This perfectly captures her wild ambition, her dark obsession, and her unraveling sanity as her id and her superego just go to total war with each other.
So, the crucial point is, how do we actually apply Freud's theory to analyze a complex character like Nina? Well, we do it in 3 really concrete steps. First, we uncover those unconscious desires. We have to ask what hidden urges are truly driving her insane perfectionism. Second, we identify the defense mechanisms. How exactly is she coping with this brutal internal conflict? Is she relying heavily on repression? And third, we spot symbolic representations, like that cracked mirror we just saw, which serves as a brilliant recurring symbol reflecting her deeply fractured unconscious thoughts.
And that brings us to Part 5, Unveiling Characters in Trifles. Time to look at how the mundane is never just mundane.
So in Susan Glaspell's classic play, Trifles, which is a huge staple in our curriculum, the male investigators completely overlook these small, seemingly unimportant items in a farmhouse kitchen. They just write them off as mere trifles. But the women in the play, they notice these objects: a violently ruined birdcage, a really chaotic, messy sewing box. Through our new lens of psychoanalytic criticism, we understand that these ordinary objects carry incredible weight. They are profound symbols of hidden emotions, intense internal struggles, and the deep emotional repression of these characters. These mundane things literally reveal the unspoken thoughts and the crushing heavy weight of the superego that the characters are desperately grappling with. When you dive into reading Trifles for your class, I want you to decode the characters using your brand new toolkit. Look at every single action and every line of dialogue through these 3 specific lenses. Ask yourself, what are the primal desires and repressed instincts driving them? Well, that's their id talking. How does their strict internalized moral compass and sense of guilt influence their behavior? Bingo, that's their superego. And finally, how do they try to negotiate these heavy societal expectations with their own hidden, messy reality? That is their ego in action. Analyzing them this way is a game changer. It reveals their true, completely unspoken motivations. And guys, this right here is exactly why literary analysis is so incredibly exciting. We just took complex, abstract Freudian theories and used them as a literal detective's magnifying glass to see the hidden truths of human behavior. You now possess the tools to look way beneath the surface of any text you encounter. So my challenge to you today is this: the next time you are reading a book for class, or hey, even just watching your absolute favorite movie on a Friday night, put on your detective lens, ask yourself, what is that character's id screaming for? What is their superego actively repressing? How do these psychological concepts apply to the stories you already know and love? You might just be completely amazed at what you uncover hidden in the unconscious depths. Keep learning, keep analyzing, and I'll see you in the next explainer.